The American muscle car formula has been a thing since the end of World War II with the Oldsmobile Rocket 88. You take a family car, rear-wheel drive, you throw a V8 in it, and you make it as cheap as possible. That is the formula. But what if one muscle car went against that formula? One that broke the mold and tried to be different. I'm talking about the Oldsmobile Toronado. Oldsmobile stylist David North drew a compact sports car as a concept called the Flame Red Car in 1962. Now, this was never intended for production, but fate had other ideas because just as he finished it, Oldsmobile got the word from GM that they could build a car to compete with Ford's Thunderbird. And they decided to give David's design the green light. There was one peculiarity about its design, though. It was front-wheel drive. See, Oldsmobile had been developing a front-wheel drive system since 1958, and the launch of the original Mini in 1959 only solidified those plans. And there were a few reasons to use front-wheel drive in the American market. The front-wheel drive layout gave better control in rough weather, and it gave more room in the cabin because you could have a flat floor. That is how the new Toronado could comfortably seat 6. That, and it was forced onto the GM e-body platform, which meant it was massive and weighed 4,500 pounds. The Mini's 50 horsepower 4-cylinder wasn't gonna be enough, that's for sure. So they did the next most logical thing, and used a 7-liter Rocket V8, making 385 horsepower. I think the most powerful front-wheel drive hatchback ever built is the Focus RS at 350 horsepower, the 2009 one. I can't think of a production front-wheel drive car that's more powerful than that, and this came out in 1965. So that makes it the most powerful production front-wheel drive car ever built. But making a V8 front-wheel drive has some challenges, mainly getting the transmission to work. You see, they were using the 3-speed gearbox they already had called the Turbo Hydromatic. And in order to make it work with a front-wheel drive engine, they put it besides the Rocket V8 and then connected them together with a chain drive. But despite hearing the word chain drive on your car, it was pretty advanced. Double wishbone suspension on the front, and leaf springs on the back with 2 shock absorbers per wheel to act as a radius drive for more comfort and better handling. Now, of course, this was still a heavy front-wheel drive luxury car, so that wasn't a very high priority, but considering all of those things I just mentioned, a 0 to 60 is 7.5 seconds, and a top speed of 135 is pretty good for front-wheel drive. It's almost as fast as a Fiesta ST today, which weighs literally half as much. And triple Indy 500 winner Bobby Unser praised the Tornado's handling and comforts. There was one thing that the Toronado was not praised at in any way, shape, or form, and that was the brakes. They were drums, which was woefully inadequate for such a heavy car at such high speed, and many drivers found themselves stopping later than they would have wished. So Oldsmobile added vented disc brakes a year later, and sales went up dramatically. They broke 20,000 per year in 1967, and the first generation Toronado would sell just under 100,000 vehicles in 4 years. The 1970 Toronado had an even bigger 7.5-liter V8, which made 375 horsepower and over 500 foot-pounds of torque. There was even a 28-foot-long limo version with 6 wheels, and it was inspired by the new Boeing 707 jetliner. Sources are a little fuzzy on this one, but between 50 and 150 of these massive Toronados were built. It was a genuinely great car. I love this thing. I've actually seen it for the first time this year, in fact. But like every iconic 60s American car, things went downhill fast. The car got bigger to nearly 5,000 pounds, but the power got smaller. First, 350 horsepower. then 250, and by 1976, just 215 horsepower from 455 cubic inches. That is pathetic. Saying that, it did still follow in the pioneering footsteps of the original, with electric window defoggers and the first ever side-mounted airbags and the first ever high-mounted brake light, which are both mandatory on cars today. Now, despite getting just 8 mpg during the gas crisis, the second generation Toronado was an even bigger success, selling over 250,000 units. Americans have never been the sharpest knife in the drawer, I guess. The third gen proved that Oldsmobile could actually learn in 1978 as they cut the weight down by half a ton. That made it lighter, and the smaller 5-liter V8 made it more efficient. And a 0 to 60 of 9.4 seconds was one of the fastest times in its class. American cars were so bad at the end of the decade. Now, it did have independent rear suspension, which was a nice touch, but otherwise the third-gen Toronado kind of sucked and looked awful. So we're going to move on to the fourth-gen pretty quick. Oh god, the fourth-gen's even worse. Yep. Not only does it look the exact same, but the V8 was gone, replaced with a 3.8-liter Buick V6, making just 150 horsepower. And to make matters even worse, GM downsized the Toronado just as gas prices fell to $1, meaning Americans no longer cared about being small and economical. They wanted to be big and bombastic. This was the 80s, greed is good. We were at the top of the world, the Soviet Union was crumbling. Yeah, not a great time to focus on small, efficient little cars. GM tried to rebound with a Trofeo Sports model, with stiffer suspension, bucket seats, and a visual information center. What the hell is that? Well, the VIC was a dashboard-mounted touchscreen that controlled the temperature, the radio, and had a trip computer. It could even be a hands-free cell phone. That's basically every car interior today. Even my base model Mustang has a touchscreen that can act as a hands-free cell phone. And they did this in 1991. Trust me, the fourth gen sucks. But the VIC was truly ahead of its time, and I gotta give credit where it's due. But sales were still poor, and by 1996, it was replaced by the equally terrible 8th gen Buick Riviera. Like a few classic American cars we've talked about, the first generation was actually the best. It was the first front-wheel drive American car in 30 years. It was a pioneer of technology, and a pretty damn good-looking one at that. I love the styling of the first generation Toronado. Sure, it's not in the upper echelons of the likes of the Hudson Hornet or the Ford Mustang, but it's definitely one of the strangest American cars of all time, and in my opinion, it's an underappreciated bit of genius.